Welcome to the Customer Success Playbook Podcast Postgame Show, Kev, where we break down our latest episode, talk about our guests, the topics we covered, and give our insights on the discussion. So we had Greg Daines on. Greg talked about 23 churn reasons in 2023. And he broke those churns out into early churn, mid churn, and late churn. Kev, the one thing that jumped out to me is I think 70% of those churn reasons had to do with sales and marketing before the client was even a customer, right? Was the causes for the churn. What in that early churn stood out to you? That surprised you?
Yeah, no, it doesn't surprise me, to be honest. The early churn, and Greg was basically pointing out, is caused by a high percentage was caused by a late fit, and I'll misquote it if I don't look for the right percentage. But basically, a high percentage of early churn is caused by misfit for the customer or not proper alignment with what your tool or your service provides. Yeah. And so I think that's a big part of the reason. And I think, Greg's research and data kind of shows definitively that if you don't get good fit, you end up with concerns from the customer. Yeah. And what were your thoughts on that?
I'm not surprised by it, right? We've all seen it, right? You bring in clients, they're not ideal. You kind of square peg round hole approach. They're unhappy and they end up leaving. So I wasn't maybe super surprised that early churn was the biggest contributor of churn. I think 70%, I think, of the reasons that kind of jumped out to me a little bit. Like it was such a high percent, like that right fit, given the free talk about the deep discounting, doing the free trials, all of that led into all this churn. So that jumped out to me a little bit. The one item he brought up, and he brought it up early, and he talked about it a few times. And again, it was, and I know our friends in CX will maybe take issue to this, but it was, customer satisfaction has no correlation on churn. Right. And he talked about, really, NPS is good if you want to try to find areas of opportunity to improve, like operationally. Yeah. But if you want to, there is no tie. He said about all the variables they've looked at in churn, NPS and customer sat is not one of them. So that, I get it. And he really did a good job of explaining that. But bit of I don't know if you call it controversial, but I know there may be a few different, perspectives on that.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely was a little surprised by that as well. I could see a low correlation. I would have guessed maybe there's a lower correlation, but when you start really thinking about it and why that is, and I think Greg did a good job of explaining this as well, is it's if you're looking at the MPS, if you're looking at that, that's really your users, your day-to-day users, right, who might be having a bad day or have had an issue, and you're getting feedback from that. But when you're looking at what companies want to achieve, and when you're trying to accomplish your customers' goals, and recognizing that the goals of the people who sign the paperwork, right, and are the ones who and sign the check, might be slightly different than the goal of the everyday user. And I think that's part of the reason we see that problem. Mm-hmm. Now, the other thing there is if you're not achieving the corporate goals for why they bought, the customer's corporate goals for why they bought your software, then ultimately you are going to see churn. Yeah. And what's more, if you've achieved those goals and you haven't figured out where your software helps them go and achieve the next goal, then you may see churn there too. So it's, it does make sense, right? It's got very little to do with how happy they are with the service.
And he told a great story. Remember that Apple story? I think it was Apple. We talked about him working with Apple, and they were super upset. And I think he actually said, like, why don't you leave? And he's like, because you get us results, right? And that was the key word for me, results. Get clients the results early. Keep getting them results. Let them know you've gotten them results, or that software has been able to achieve the results they wanted. And he had a quote that said, "If you're not measuring customer results, you're flying blind." Right? And I think that's so important. I think a lot of companies measure internal results or internal metrics, but are they directly related to the customer's end result? Is it making them successful? And we had James Scott on. He mentioned the same thing, right? So
Yeah.
a common theme here: you really need to be aligned with the customer and what makes them successful, not so much all the time what makes you successful.
Yeah, and just since you referenced James, because right when you did it, I was having the same thought as you were leading into it. James's mention of the Help Me score, or tool, which was, I think, also, again, it's trying to help focus your organization around the concept of, this is what we're trying to do for the customer. How do we help the customer achieve what they're looking for? By truly identifying those and then working within the organizations, you can, again, going back to the Sue episode, that's where you can start driving organizational alignment.
Yeah.
How do I see this goal that we're trying to achieve as an organization, from all the way from sales through product into services? How do we help the customer achieve that goal?
That's right. It's all that alignment around everyone focused on the end result for the customers, and everyone, the product, marketing, everyone needs to know what makes the customer successful, right?
Yep.
And it's when you say it, like, you're like, oh, of course, that's so easy. Why don't all companies do this? But we know it's not always that easy for sure. It takes a lot of work and a lot of analysis and a lot of alignment to get to that point. So I love the show. I thought that if you've not read the 23 churn reasons in 2023, Greg has an ebook online. Google it, find it. It's a super easy read. It's chock full of information.
Check the notes in this video or podcast, and we'll have the link to it there.
We'll have the link. It's definitely worth a read. I breezed through it. I've actually referenced it a few times. If you like this episode, if you like all of our episodes, subscribe so you know when they're coming out. Like, comment, that helps us in our rankings. We want to get noticed. And reach out to us. Reach out to @Roman Trebon on LinkedIn, @Kevin Metzger on LinkedIn. Let us know what you think of the shows. Let us know guests we should have on, topics to discuss, etc. Kev, anything else for this post-game show?
Yeah, you also probably, close to the time we've got this published, you can come to customersuccessplaybook.ai and find us there as well.
New website. I'm excited for that. Hey, look at that. All right. Well, awesome. Well, thanks, everyone. I really appreciate your time, and thanks for listening.